Candace Owens exposes the truth about Erika Kirk's ex Cabot Phillips. The internet didn't just flinch when Candace Owens said the name, it froze. Because this wasn't a casual mention. This wasn't a side comment. This was a deliberate pause, a calculated breath, and then a sentence that detonated across social media like a siren nobody was prepared to hear. Candace Owens looked straight into the camera and reopened a chapter everyone assumed had been sealed shut forever, and in that moment, the narrative cracked wide open. Within minutes, timelines were being scrubbed, old clips resurfaced, and comment sections turned into digital war zones. People weren't asking if something was going on anymore, they were asking why now. Why bring up Erika Kirk's past relationship at this exact moment? Why reference Cabot Phillips at all? And why did Candace's tone sound less like commentary and more like a warning? What followed wasn't confirmation, it was chaos. Viral clips were cut out of context and looped millions of times. Twitter erupted into theories. TikTok detectives started stitching together timelines like a true crime investigation. Supporters called it courage. Critics called it calculated. Everyone agreed on one thing: this wasn't accidental. Candace didn't accuse. She implied. She didn't expose documents. She exposed discomfort. And sometimes that's even more powerful. Because when a public figure hints that a long-buried story deserves another look, the internet does the rest, digging, speculating, escalating until perception becomes pressure. And here's the part that made people lean closer to their screens. Candace suggested that what the public thinks it knows about that past relationship might not be the full story, not because of new proof, but because of what was never talked about in the first place. And once that door opened, it didn't matter whether answers followed. The question alone was enough to set everything on fire. The moment that name left Candace Owens' mouth, the silence that followed felt intentional, almost theatrical, like she knew exactly what she was unleashing and wanted the world to sit in it for a second before the chaos hit. And chaos did hit. Hard. Because Cabot Phillips wasn't just an ex-boyfriend buried in some forgotten chapter of Erika Kirk's life. He was a ghost the internet had never fully stopped whispering about. A presence that had always felt oddly erased, too cleanly removed from the story, like someone had taken an eraser to a timeline that didn't quite line up. Almost instantly, old photos began resurfacing. Not because Candace showed them, but because people remembered they existed. Screenshots from years ago, awkward smiles, captions that once seemed harmless, but now felt loaded with subtext. Fans noticed how abruptly Cabot disappeared from Erika's public life, how quickly the narrative pivoted, how neatly the past was wrapped up with a bow labeled amicable. And now Candace had just ripped that bow off in front of millions. What made it worse was how calm she was. No shouting. No dramatics. Just that measured tone that says, I know something you don't, and I'm deciding how much to give you. She hinted that Cabot wasn't just collateral damage of a breakup, but a loose end. Someone who knew things. Someone whose silence wasn't accidental. And once that idea landed, the internet ran with it like gasoline had been poured on a spark. Anonymous accounts started popping up within the hour. Some claimed to have been around back then. Others said they'd heard things they couldn't prove, but always felt off. A few posted cryptic messages like, "There's a reason he never spoke, and y'all are finally asking the right questions." Were they real insiders or clout chasers? Nobody knew, but it didn't matter. The energy had shifted. Doubt had entered the chat. Then came the timeline wars. People started lining up dates like chess pieces. When exactly did Erika and Cabot end things? When did her next chapter begin publicly? Why were there gaps that had never been explained? Why did interviews from that era feel so carefully worded in hindsight? Old podcast clips were dissected frame by frame, with viewers pointing out pauses, nervous laughs, moments where Erika redirected questions instead of answering them directly. At the time, it looked like privacy. Now, people were calling it control. And Cabot? Silent. Completely silent. Which somehow made it louder. No denials. No subtweets. No sudden statements. Just the absence of a man the internet was suddenly obsessed with again. Some interpreted that silence as dignity. Others as fear. Others as strategy. But Candace's implication hung over everything. That he tried to speak once, and it didn't go well. That's where things turned darker. A claim began circulating that Cabot had been quietly discouraged from telling his side. Not threatened, not silenced in some dramatic movie scene way, but nudged. Advised. Frozen out. According to one anonymous post that went viral before being deleted, there were conversations behind the scenes about protecting the narrative. No proof. No names. Just enough vagueness to make people uneasy. Candace didn't confirm any of that, but she didn't shut it down either. She let the speculation breathe. She talked about how stories get shaped, how public images don't build themselves, how certain voices get amplified while others conveniently fade away. And every time she said some people, the audience heard someone specific. The most explosive moment came when Candace suggested that Cabot knew something that, if revisited, would force people to look differently at everything that came after. Not just the breakup. Not just the rebrand. But the carefully constructed life that followed. She didn't say what it was. She didn't even say it was a scandal. She just said it mattered. And sometimes that's more dangerous than an accusation. Within hours, hashtags trended. Supporters of Erika accused Candace of stirring drama for attention. Critics accused Erika of burying the past. Neutral observers just watched as the story grew teeth. Former associates of both parties were dragged into comment sections, asked to confirm or deny things they probably never wanted associated with their names again. Silence became suspicious. Defensiveness became evidence. And then there was that one clip that kept circulating. An old video where Erika, years ago, was asked about her past relationships and smiled before saying she preferred to focus on the future. At the time, it sounded healthy. Now, people replayed it with eerie music layered underneath, calling it foreshadowing. That's how fast the narrative flipped. Behind the scenes, sources claimed phones were ringing. PR teams were monitoring the situation. Friends were being advised not to engage. Nothing official, of course. No statements. No corrections. Just that familiar quiet that always seems to follow when a story hits too close to something real. And just when the internet thought it had reached peak speculation, Candace dropped one more line that changed the temperature entirely. She said this wasn't about dragging up old drama. This was about honesty. About why some stories get rewritten and others disappear. About why one person moved on cleanly and another faded into the background with no voice, no closure, no public acknowledgement. She said Cabot Phillips wasn't a villain. He wasn't a hero either. He was a piece of a puzzle people were never meant to examine too closely. And now that they were, the picture wasn't as tidy as everyone remembered. As the clip ended, viewers were left staring at their screens with the same thought looping in their minds. If this was only the beginning, if Candace was just setting the stage, then whatever comes next isn't about gossip anymore. It's about whose version of the past survives, when the spotlight swings back to places it was never supposed to shine again. What happened next didn't feel accidental. It felt coordinated, like the second Candace cracked the door open, something that had been waiting in the dark rushed forward all at once. Overnight, the tone shifted from curiosity to tension. This wasn't just people gossiping anymore. This was people choosing sides, digging trenches, and preparing for impact. By the next morning, multiple anonymous accounts claimed they had context on why Cabot Phillips vanished so cleanly from the public narrative. None of them said the same thing outright, but they all circled the same idea: he didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because staying visible came at a cost he wasn't prepared to pay. Again, no proof. Just patterns. Just whispers. Just enough smoke to make everyone wonder where the fire actually was. Candace returned to the conversation with a follow-up that felt sharper, colder, and far more deliberate. She said when people think about breakups involving public figures, they assume emotions are the most dangerous part. Hurt feelings. Jealousy. Ego. But the real danger, she said, is information. Who has it? Who controls it? And who decides when it's allowed to exist? She hinted that during the final stretch of Erika and Cabot's relationship, there were conversations happening that never made it into the official story. Conversations about timing. About optics. About what could and couldn't be said publicly. According to Candace, those conversations didn't end when the relationship did. They followed Cabot afterward like a shadow. That's when the first alleged leak surfaced. A screenshot posted by a burner account that lasted less than 20 minutes before disappearing. It showed a blurred text exchange with dates obscured, but one line stood out and was screenshot endlessly before it vanished. This isn't about feelings anymore. This is about protecting what's being built. Nobody could verify it. Nobody could trace it. But it spread anyway, because it fit too neatly into the story people were already forming in their minds. Supporters rushed to say it was fake, manufactured, clout chasing. And maybe it was. But the timing was brutal. Because just hours later, an old acquaintance of Cabot's liked a tweet that read, "Silencing someone doesn't make the truth disappear. It just delays the reckoning." The like was removed. Screenshots weren't. At the same time, Erika's online presence subtly changed. Comments were limited. Posts went up and came down. Stories were noticeably more polished, more controlled, almost sterile. Fans who had followed her for years said it felt like she was retreating behind a wall instead of engaging head-on. To some, that looked smart. To others, it looked like fear. Candace leaned into that perception without ever stating it outright. She talked about how people react differently when they know the narrative is slipping. Some fight. Some deny. Some go quiet and hope the storm passes. And then she said something that made the room feel colder through the screen. She said, "The quietest response is often the loudest admission that something matters." Then came the alleged voice memo. It wasn't released in full. It wasn't even clear where it came from. But Candace described it in detail. A short audio clip, distorted, allegedly from years ago, where a male voice expresses frustration about being cut out of conversations that directly involved him. About decisions being made without him. About being told that, "This is bigger than us now." Candace made it clear she couldn't confirm its authenticity publicly yet, but she also made it clear she didn't dismiss it. The internet did the rest. People began asking questions that hadn't been asked before. Why did Cabot never publicly address the breakup? Why were there no messy interviews, no emotional podcast appearances, no tell-all moments, especially in an era where that kind of content is currency? Why did he disappear instead of capitalizing on the attention? The answers people came up with were darker than the questions. Another twist landed when a former colleague from the same media-adjacent circles posted a cryptic message that read, "Some of us were told to choose loyalty over honesty. Not everyone chose the same way." Comments flooded in demanding clarification. The post stayed up for exactly 1 hour before being deleted. By then, it had already done its damage. Candace addressed that too. She said loyalty is a powerful weapon when it's framed as morality. When people are told staying quiet is the right thing, even if it means someone else disappears in the process. She didn't accuse Erika directly. She didn't need to. She let the audience connect the dots, and that made it hit harder. Meanwhile, Cabot remained completely silent. No interviews. No statements. No reactions to being dragged back into the spotlight. Some interpreted that as restraint. Others began to wonder if silence was part of an agreement made long ago. An agreement that maybe wasn't written down, but understood. Then Candace dropped the line that changed everything. She said there was a moment, late in the relationship, where Cabot allegedly realized he was no longer part of the future being planned. Not emotionally. Structurally. She said he wasn't just being left behind. He was being edited out. And according to her sources, that realization didn't come from a fight. It came from something he saw. Something he read. Something that made him understand his role had already been replaced in the story. She didn't say what it was. She didn't say when it happened. She only said that once you understand that moment, everything else makes sense. And that's where the tension peaked. Because if Candace was telling the truth, then this wasn't a messy breakup story. It was a controlled transition. A narrative handoff. One chapter closed, another opened, with one character quietly removed before he could disrupt the plot. As the episode ended, Candace looked straight into the camera, and said she hadn't even touched the most uncomfortable part yet. She said the next piece doesn't just explain why Cabot disappeared. It explains why certain people were so invested in making sure he stayed gone. And with that, the screen cut to black, leaving one terrifying question hanging in the air. If someone had the power to erase him once, what happens now that the eraser isn't working anymore? By the time the story reached this point, it stopped feeling like internet drama and started feeling like a countdown. Not to a revelation, but to a rupture. Because what unfolded next wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was methodical, slow, and deeply unsettling in the way only controlled panic ever is. Candace came back one final time, and this time her tone was different. Gone was the sharp edge, the confrontational posture. What replaced it was something colder. Heavier. She said when stories like this reach a certain temperature, the truth doesn't explode anymore. It leaks. Quietly. From places you never expect. And according to her, that's exactly what had begun to happen. She revealed that since speaking out, she'd been contacted by multiple people who all said the same thing in different ways. You're closer than you think. None of them wanted to be named. None of them wanted to go on record. But they all confirmed one thing: the situation between Erika Kirk and Cabot Phillips was never just personal. It was strategic. Allegedly. Candace emphasized that everything she was sharing was based on claims, sources, and material still being verified. But she also made it clear that patterns don't lie, even when people do. And the pattern that kept surfacing was this: whenever Cabot's name came close to re-entering public conversation, something intervened. A distraction. A redirect. A reframing. Always subtle. Always effective. She then addressed the biggest question people were asking: why now? According to Candace, the timing wasn't random. She claimed Cabot had recently been approached about participating in a long-form interview project. Not political. Not sensational. Just reflective. And the moment that possibility became real, the old tension resurfaced. Allegedly. People who hadn't spoken to him in years suddenly reached out. Old connections reactivated. Conversations that felt less like concern and more like containment. Then came the most chilling detail of all. Candace said one source told her that Cabot was warned, indirectly, that revisiting the past would confuse people and create unnecessary damage. Not to himself. To others. To institutions. To narratives that had already moved on without him. The implication was clear without ever being stated outright. His truth was inconvenient. And that's when Candace asked the question no one else had dared to ask out loud. If telling your own story causes damage, whose story were you living in the first place? The internet, predictably, imploded. Some people accused Candace of manufacturing drama. Others accused her of targeting Erika unfairly. But just as many began asking why Erika herself still hadn't directly addressed any of it. Not with a denial. Not with clarification. Just silence. And in the vacuum of that silence, speculation grew teeth. Then came the final alleged leak. A document. Unverified. Circulating privately at first. A timeline comparison compiled by anonymous users cross-referencing public appearances, deleted posts, and archived media. No conclusions. No accusations. Just dates. Side by side. Candace didn't endorse it. She didn't share it publicly. But she acknowledged its existence and said, when people start doing this level of homework, it means trust has already been lost. At the same time, people close to the situation began changing their behavior. Accounts went private. Comments were shut off. Collaborations quietly disappeared from bias. None of it proved anything. But together, it painted a picture of people bracing for impact rather than standing firm in confidence. Candace ended her segment with the most unsettling thought yet. She said the danger isn't that a secret comes out. The danger is that the wrong version of the truth becomes permanent. That someone gets remembered for a silence they never chose. That a narrative gets locked in place simply because it was repeated enough times by the right people. She stressed again that these were allegations, interpretations, and claims still unfolding. But she also said something that landed like a final warning. If Cabot ever decides to speak, it won't be to attack anyone. It will be to reclaim something that was taken from him, his own voice. And then she said the line that left everyone frozen. Ask yourself why so many people are afraid of that. No names. No accusations. Just a question that refuses to go away. Because if nothing happened, there would be nothing to fear. And if the past was as clean as presented, it wouldn't need protecting. So now the story sits in an uneasy stillness. Not resolved. Not denied. Not confirmed. Just waiting. Waiting to see whether silence will hold, or whether someone finally decides that the truth is worth whatever it costs. And the most dangerous part. The longer this goes unanswered, the louder the unanswered questions become. If you've made it this far, understand something very clearly. You're already in the middle of a story that is still unfolding in real time. This isn't recycled gossip. This isn't a closed chapter. This is one of those moments where the internet senses that something unresolved is sitting just beneath the surface, and when it finally breaks, the people who were paying attention early will understand it first. This is why you cannot scroll past this and pretend it didn't happen. Because silence doesn't mean nothing's coming. It means people are deciding when to move next. And when they do, it won't come with a warning label. If you want the updates the second they drop, if you want the receipts, the timeline breakdowns, the responses that happen quietly before they ever reach headlines, you already know what to do. Hit that like button so this conversation doesn't get buried. It tells the algorithm, and everyone watching, that this story matters. Drop a comment. Not a throwaway one. Say what you think is really going on. Do you believe the past is being protected? Do you think silence is strategy? Or do you think someone is being unfairly dragged into speculation? These comments shape what gets investigated next. And most importantly, subscribe with notifications on. Not tomorrow. Not later. Because when the next piece of this story moves, whether it's a statement, a denial, or a reveal nobody saw coming, it will happen fast. And missing it means letting someone else control the narrative for you. This isn't just about one name or one moment. It's about how stories are built, erased, and rewritten right in front of us. Stay locked in. Because once the truth finally decides to speak, there will be no rewinding it.